Hey, this is Nate with BleepinJeep. Today we are going to do a valve adjustment on a Mercedes OM617. I pulled the engine out of the car, and before I put it in the truck, there's a number of things I'd like to take care of first, and the valve adjustment is one of them because it'll be a little easier to reach all this stuff. We need to start by removing these bolts in order to remove the linkage and get it out of our way. Next, remove this little clip in order to bend the rest of the linkage up and out of your way. One more little retain clip right here. Now, should be able to pull this linkage apart. There we go. Get it up out of our way. Now we're ready to remove our valve cover. We have these 4 nuts around the valve cover that hold it on. Before we get to removing that, I'd like to spray this down with a little bit of soap and water and then blow it off with an air nozzle to make sure that no debris is going to get, we've got some of this crusty stuff. Yeah, make sure none of that gets into our engine, and then we can pull it. Now let's remove these nuts for the valve cover. Alright, let's remove this bad boy. Let's see what we're up against. Woo! Gonna have to move a fuel line. It's not so bad, actually. Now, if you're not familiar with what it means to adjust the valves, is you have valves going in and out of your cylinder head here, and this is your camshaft, and when the cam lobe goes up and down, it depresses your spring and makes it to where the valve opens and closes. So this is going to be easier. So we're going to need a turn in order to adjust everything to the right depth, basically. So we're going to turn it right here using the there's a big bolt inside that attaches to your crank, and it's going to be a lot easier if we either remove the injectors or if we remove the glow plugs. I'm going to remove the glow plugs. I'm going to be testing the compression later anyway, and there's some things that they call heat shields underneath this style injector. You'd have to replace them. This way I can just remove the glow plugs, turn everything over nice and easy, and then test the compression and then put the glow plugs back in. So that's what we're going to do. To remove the glow plugs, you need an 8mm and a 13mm wrench. And you take your 8mm, you're going to loosen up this outside nut that is then going to make it to where you can remove the harness for all the different glow plugs, and then you can just take your 13mm and pull them on out of it. Now some of these glow plugs are hard to get out. They get a bunch of carbon and stuff built up on the end of them, and then you can break them loose, but they want to fight you all the way out. So I like to remedy that by doing a little seafoam spray, and I'll just let it sit in there, and it helps break down a lot of the carbon, make it easier to reinstall later. Now you can see how easy it turns. Since we don't have those glow plugs in there, it can't create any compression. Makes it a lot easier to spin to do this kind of work. And I got to inspect the glow plugs to see what they look like, because sometimes they need to be replaced, but those actually look pretty decent. Let's get started. You're going to have intake and exhaust lobes, and they're going to be spec'd at a slightly different clearance that you need to check with your feeler gauges. You can look it up online and it'll show you exactly which one is exhaust and intake and in the order, or you can double check yourself by looking at the your intake manifold is here, your exhaust manifold is down here, and you can follow where the runner is for your intake or exhaust up to the correlating valve. So we know that we're going to start with an exhaust valve here that you can actually physically see the valve spring and everything here, and then right here, and then these are our adjusters up here, and I'll get a better view of the adjusters so you can see. So if you look closely, you can see you've got two nuts here. One locks it down. This will lock down the adjustment, and the other one will physically adjust the clearance between your valve and the cam lobe. So what we're going to do is we've got to break these loose, and then you're going to adjust. Everything I read says that the top one is what locks it in and the bottom one is what adjusts it. But then you'll see other things on forums where people say it's the opposite. Either way, it doesn't matter. The whole point is you're going to break these loose. I'm gonna turn this one because this is the one that you're supposed to turn, and it's very easy to tell which is which, just because as soon as you start turning it, you'll be able to measure the actual clearance with your feeler gauge. It's either going to go in or it isn't, and you're going to be able to see if it's getting looser or tighter. So as I loosen or tighten this, I'm going to adjust to where I can get the right thickness for the feeler gauge on the other side. So we're going to turn the bolt on the crankshaft until we can get this first cam lobe at a 90 position. There's a little controversy online over whether or not you want it at 90, like a 12 o'clock position or a 1 o'clock position. I don't see how it could matter that much. We're just going to go straight up. So since this is an exhaust valve, we need to use the 0.35 millimeter feeler gauge, and it's not slipping in there. It's too tight. So I've already broke these loose, and now I'm going to turn the bottom nut to the right to loosen it up and give us a little bit more clearance so this feeler gauge can fit. Oh, there we go. So now I can fit the right size feeler gauge in there. So now I'm going to hold that place with the lower wrench, and then I'm going to tighten up the jam nut on top. Now that I know that it's at the right depth, I'm going to hold the lower nut while I'm tightening up the upper jam nut here. Oops. It's kind of hard to tighten and loosen things with these injectors in the way. I just don't want to pull these things and have to get new heat shields for them. Alright, now that we're tight, let's see. Can we fit our feeler gauge in there? Yes, we can. And that feels just about right. You want it, you'd rather have them too loose than too tight. It's pretty important that they're not too tight. Now, same drill for the next one. This next one, if you follow the valve down, you can see which runner it is, and it's going to be an intake runner. So let's turn the motor over until that thing's facing straight up. There we go, cam lobe straight up. Now these intake valves need to be at a 0.10 millimeter. And again, looks like we're too tight. Yeah, this is why they need to be adjusted. And from what I've read, a lot of people talk about doing all kinds of things to make their engines run right, and then they adjust the valves and things just, it's the biggest change. So I mean, depending on how long it's been since they've been adjusted, this can make a massive difference. Ooh. There we go. Now, should be able to turn that. So we're turning this lower nut until we can slide the feeler gauge in. I'm finding that I started using this crow's foot and it's actually working a little bit easier because I can kind of get in there from the side. In some cases I can even get in there from this side and then loosen it up that way. So a couple little tricks, and it's the same thing over and over. You just follow. It's got exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust, and it's just so on and so forth. You just follow which one on the intake runners. Now usually when I'm done doing something like this and I'm done adjusting the valves, I will turn the engine over and check them all one more time to make sure that everything still isn't too tight, I guess. It's okay if it's a hair loose, but yeah, just it's good to check your work and make sure that everything ended up being where it's supposed to be. Well, that's it. Go through, adjust everything where it needs to be, double check, of course, and it says online to do it every 12,000 miles or so, so maybe every other oil change. I guess it depends on what your intervals are. I just got this rig, so of course I have no idea when the last time it was done. I'm really glad that I did it. Every single valve was too tight and needed to be adjusted, which is usually an indicator that hasn't been done in a while. So thank you for watching, and if you like what you see and you want to see more, subscribe or give us a like. Support us on Patreon. Thank you very much.